Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sikha Saran Shir. Today, we're going to be doing Sikha number 93. So just to give a little introduction about this shir, it's actually about having faith in tzaddikim and trusting in tzaddikim and the power of tzaddikim. So, sometimes I feel a little uncomfortable explaining this because I know it's like a controversial subject and that people feel uncomfortable with thinking of like the tzaddik as the intermediary. But I think it's important to remember that the tzaddik has no power of his own, and everything that is given to him is given to him through Hashem. I also want to mention, just last week I went to Shmuel Hanavi, and I went around to Kfarim, Kibbutz Rachel, and we have this concept of davening, b'schus tzaddikim. And I think it's just so, let's say around Kibbutz Shmuel Hanavi, around his kibbutz, kept on saying different quotes about him and how amazing he was. And there's this, and it said that he traveled all around Eretz Yisrael and brought Bnei Yisrael's message to Hashem and Hashem's message to Bnei Yisrael. So there is this strong concept of tzaddikim and them helping us and bringing our tefillos up to Hashem and, somewhat getting in between. I think on that note, it's also so cool about Rabbi Nachman and Breslov that he put a lot of emphasis on the tzaddik and the power of the tzaddik, but he also put a lot of emphasis on a person's personal relationship with Hashem. And in tandem at different times, if you balance it correct, you could get to extremely, extremely high levels. So, okay, without further ado, let's begin. We're going to start with Sikha 93. Okay, no, there's a light that shines in 1,000 worlds. This light is so intense that the average person cannot receive it. It can be accepted only by a great sage who can divide the thousands into hundreds. Such a sage can divide this great light into small portions that can be grasped by those below him. Then they can receive it a little at a time. So Rabbi Nachman opens and he says, there's this light, this ore that comes into the world. And it's so bright that we can't, regular people, they don't know what to do with it. It's too much. So the tzaddik comes in and he breaks it up and he brings it into small pieces and he kind of translates it and spreads it out into different entire worlds, a little bit at a time, he says. A lesson may be so complex that it is incomprehensible. However, if it is broken into many simpler concepts, each one can be understood by itself. In this way, the entire lesson becomes clear. The same is true of the light that shines in 1,000 worlds. It is one simple light that cannot be perceived in part. A single concept, it can only be taken as a whole. But there is a scholar who is vengeful and vindictive. He can divide the thousands into hundreds. Such a sage can divide this great light into portions that can be comprehended and accepted. So Rabbi Nachman's giving a mashal of, it's a very complex Torah lesson that, you can't, the only way to really understand this Torah lesson is to divide it into smaller pieces and then everybody could take it in. So he's saying that this light, Rabbi Nachman's saying it's comparable to this light that only this great sage, this great tzaddik could take it and separate it so that way we can be able to comprehend and accept it. And Rabbi Nachman says that this scholar is vengeful and vindictive. So I was those are harsh words, but I think what he's trying to say here is he's saying he's makbid, he's able to break away things so carefully, so intensely that these words, vengeful and vindictive, applies to him. Okay, it is written, he who harps on something separates a prince, from Mishlei. Rashi writes that he who harps is one who is vengeful and vindictive, harping on what another does to him. Through this, he separates a prince. He separates himself from God, who is the Lord and Prince of the universe. This report refers to an ordinary individual. A sage, however, has a duty to be vengeful and vindictive. As the Talmud teaches, every sage who is not vengeful and vindictive like a snake, is no scholar from Yoma. The above verse speaks of the vengeful and vindictive sage who can provide the thousands into hundreds. He who harps on something separates a prince, aloof. Aleph means thousands, and aloof is a leader of thousands. Thus, he who harps on something, the vengeful and vindictive sage, separates the thousands, divides the thousands into hundreds. Okay, so Rabbi Nachman saying here, he brings a quote from Mishlei, which is talking about like, he who harps on something separates a prince. So it sounds like bad, right? A person who harps on something. And Rashi writes, the he who harps is like this guy who's holding another person responsible. He's harping on something. He's holding a grudge, right? But Rabbi Nachman teaches us from Yoma that it's not, but when the tzaddik harps on something, it's like you need a scholar, you need a tzaddik to harp on something, because he has to like pick things apart. Like think about, all our like Gemara, and it says Rabbi Akiva said this, and Rabbi Hillel said this, and right, like all these great sages, these great tzaddikim, these great scholars, they harped on like every word of Gemara, and they were vindictive and vengeful, and they picked everything apart, right? So this is how the tzaddik has to be. The Talmud teaches, if you see a sage who is vengeful and vindictive like a snake, bind him around your waist from Shabbos. Rashi explains you will eventually derive great benefit from his scholarship. So we need this. Such a vindictive sage can divide the great light into portions, separating thousands into hundreds. Therefore, you will eventually derive benefit from his scholarship, for without him, the light is so great that you will not be able to grasp it. There is a logical reason why only a vengeful sage can divide thousands into hundreds, but it is very deep indeed. Okay, I'm embarrassed to admit, but I'm not really understanding the second part of this. I tried, but we're going to read it through either way, okay? But unfortunately, I won't be able to explain it, but if somebody has insight into it, please leave a comment. I would love to understand it and learn it. Okay, one who understands it can bring the dead back to life. He's the one the Talmud speaks of when it states, a time will come when tzaddikim will resurrect the dead, from Pesachim. One who understands it truly understands death. When one divides the thousands into hundreds, he brings the thousand into the hundred and makes from death hundreds. Thousand is Aleph, the letter Aleph, death is Mavet. Bring the Aleph into Mavet, and you have Mem, Aleph, Vav, Taf, Ma'ot, hundreds. So he's giving an explanation about death is like Mavis and Ma'ot is hundreds, and there's some correlation here between the death and between dividing this great light from thousands into hundreds. One who does not understand this concept does not know why he's happy now. So there's something very deep going on here. And if like you don't understand this concept, which I'm going to say I don't understand the concept, then I don't know why I'm happy now, right? That's what we're learning. He does not understand how we speak of God's unity in the second line of the Shema. Blessed is the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso Le'olam Va'ed. It is customary to say this line quietly. The Talmud explains the reason with a parable. A princess smells a pudding called Sikeh Kedera, a savory pudding made by the lower classes. If she asks for it, she is disgraced. If she is not, she is distressed. Therefore, her servants bring it to her quietly. He who does not understand the reason for a vindictive sage does not understand the significance of Sikeh Kedera. He also does not understand the meaning of the first two letters, Chet Shin of Chashma, the electrum seen in Ezekiel's vision. He also does not know the meaning of Noga, the brightness in Ezekiel's vision, mentioned in the verse, a brightness round about it. He also does not know the workings of the Merkava, of the divine chariot. He does not understand the concept of the covenant, nor why people dispute him. Okay, so there's a lot that a person doesn't understand if he doesn't understand how the tzaddik brings down this light. Okay, now we're gonna get into a second part of this. The Mashiach understands this concept perfectly. So the great Mashiach, he gets this, all the stuff that I don't understand. Tzaddikim, however, cannot comprehend it unless they themselves can divide the thousands into hundreds. These are the tzaddikim who are vengeful and vindictive, and these tzaddikim are the Mashiach's belt. The Talmud teaches, if you see a sage who is vengeful and vindictive like a snake, bind him around your waist. This is the Mashiach's belt. Regarding the Mashiach, it is written, the belt around his loins shall be righteousness. Targum Yonatan renders this, and the tzaddikim shall be around him. This is the concept of matun, waiting, the aspect of hundreds. The tzaddikim, who can divide thousands into hundreds, will be the belt of the Mashiach. These resurrect the lesser tzaddikim. So Rabbi Nachman is saying here that even though it's hard for us to understand all this stuff, the Mashiach understands this perfectly. And again, like we're talking about great leaders, we're talking about leaders that we need. I think like we all know how much we're all craving great leadership nowadays. Like how, I mean, even in Avodas Hashem, even in holy things, right? Like we're all confused. Should we be spending more time on Chesed? Should we be spending more time on Tefillah? What does Hashem want for me? You know, I think many of us have questions such as that. And of course, with all the craziness that goes on in the world and, you know, even just craziness that goes on in homes with divorce and pain with children, and we're looking for this leadership. And the Mashiach, like, he's going to understand this concept. He's going to understand happiness. He's going to understand how to give us all clarity and how to lead us in the way that we're craving to be led. And it says also that all the tzaddikim that we know of, they're going to be like Mashiach's belt. Like they're going to be, I guess, his army that it's going to help. It's going to help Mashiach, Mir Hashem. So looking forward to those days. Okay, so now, so I wanted to bring in like more stuff about the tzaddik, and I was reading like a pretty straightforward piece, as straightforward as it could be, from Likutei Moharan, and I think like again, like it just like it's gonna just like pull in a little more this concept of the tzaddik. So I'm just gonna read and we'll explain and read, and God willing, should be fun. Okay. The orach tzaddikim ka'or noga holech ba'or ad nachon hayom. So the path of the righteous is like a shining light, growing even brighter as the sun until noon, from Mishlei. The sun itself radiates in its place consistently, whether in the morning or the middle of the day. The obstacle is only because of the earth, which obstructs between people and the sun. This is why the light does not spread out all that much at the beginning of the day, but a little at a time until it is spread across the earth. Okay, so we know the sun, right? And the sun is shining all day and night. It's not like it doesn't get less, doesn't get more. It's constant. The sun is constant. But the reason why we don't see it that way is because the earth is turning and like we're not getting that impression, right? So the same is true of the tzaddik. He himself always shines. The obstacle is only because of the receiver. In other words, the obstacle is because of the earth, which obstructs this world. For people submerged in this world and so are unable to receive the light of the tzaddik. So what's blocking us from seeing this great or that the tzaddik gives? We're like the earth, right? That like changes and moves. It's people. Like the issue is with the receiver, not the giver. This is the point of that which is taught in the Talmud on the verse, a folded scroll. When it is folded, when it is peeled, we find therefore that the entire world is like one span and 3,200 of the Torah. Thus, the Torah is very great and broad. However, the small span, which is the world, bars one vision and prevents one from seeing the Torah's great light. Even through this world, in its entirety, is no bigger than a small span vis-a-vis the Torah, which is very great and broader than the sea. So Rabbi Nachman is saying it's not just tzaddikim that we're having this issue of seeing the great light. It's also with Torah. We don't see like the holiness and the sacredness and like it's the answer to everything. We don't see the Torah as that. And it's hard to see the great light because again, we have this blockage. But there is an apparent difficulty. How can such a small thing as this obstruct and block out such a great thing, which is very few thousand times its size? For all this world in its entirety is very small vis-a-vis Torah, which is thousands of times greater than it. So Rabbi Nachman is saying like, but this doesn't make any sense. Like, how is it that the physicality of this world even has the power to block something so magnanimous as the Torah? It doesn't even make any sense. However, it is like the following example. A small coin, if held in front of your eyes, will prevent you from seeing a large mountain, even though the mountain is thousands of times greater than the small coin. Nevertheless, because the coin stands in front of one's eyes, it therefore blocks out one's vision to the point where one cannot see a thing many times larger than it. So Rabbi Nachman's giving an amazing example. Like, yeah, you're right. This everything that we're living in is nothing compared to the light of the Torah and the light of the Tzaddik. But the reason why we're so blocked by it is because, giving an example of like a small coin that's held right by our eyes, like it completely obstructs our vision, even though it's tiny compared to like this example that gives of this large mountain. The same is true when a person arrives in and comes to this world. He remains submerged there in the futility of the world. So it seems to him there's nothing better than this. This world, small and insignificant, prevents him from seeing the great and lofty light of Torah, which is thousands of times greater than it, as explained. This is exactly the example of the sun, that the earth obstructs one from seeing the sun's great light, even though the sun is many times larger than the earth. It is like the example mentioned above. So even though like this world, it's so like we get sucked in to the futility, to the emptiness, to the materialism here. And I mean, everyone will put in exactly what that is for them, you know, and it blocks us. It blocks us from seeing the greatness that's around us at all times. Okay, so again, okay, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. All this is because the world stands in front of his eyes and blocks him such that he cannot see the light of the Torah and the Tzaddikim, which is thousands of times greater than it. However, if he removes the small obstruction from in front of his eyes, that is, he diverts his gaze away from this world, and instead of looking at this world, raises his head and lifts his eyes to look above the world, which obstructs and blocks, he will then merit seeing the great lofty light of the Torah and the Tzaddikim. For in truth, their light is thousands and tens of thousands of times greater than this world and its futilities as mentioned. It is only that this world stands in front of his eyes and does not allow him to divert his gaze so as to look upwards to the light of the Torah and Tzaddikim. This is exactly like the aforementioned example of the small coin which stands in front of the eyes and obstructs him from seeing a large mountain. Yet he can easily remove the coin from in front of his eyes and immediately see the mountain which is greater than it. So, so Rabbi Nachman's saying here that, again, like we get sucked in, but all we have to do is look away from the coin, just look away from the coin and see all the light, and like everything's here for us. It's just a matter of us recognizing it. It's just a matter of us feeling it and seeing it and being able to take it in. So, you know, so we should always be working to take away that large coin and to see like the bigger picture that's here. I give Saul a bracha that we should succeed in that. So, okay. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful day.